Analyzing life.
Considering the answers.
The John Passadino Show.
With guest
Professor Daniel B. Gallagher.
Welcome to the John Passadino Show. I am John Passadino, and I have a guest with me today, and I'm going to introduce him now. He is Daniel Gallagher, who teaches philosophy and literature at Rollstone College. He has previously held positions at Cornell University, University of Notre Dame, Aquinas College, and St. Mary's College. After serving for a decade on the secretarial staffs of Popes Benedict XVI and Francis, specializing in medieval philosophy, he is the author of numerous articles in metaphysics, aesthetics, and theology, and has taught a wide range of courses in Latin literature, including prose, poetry, and composition. Professor Gallagher holds degrees from the University of Michigan, the Catholic University of America, and the Pontifical Gregorian University. Welcome, Dan.
John, pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for the invitation. I look forward to it.
Thank you, too, for joining. One of the most interesting, there's so many topics we could talk about, but I wanted to get to one right away that is an important one today, and that is the topic of rhetoric. And I was doing a little Googling an AI search on rhetoric, and a simple definition, as I see it in front of me in my notes, is it's used to persuade, inform, motivate, entertain. And then I was going through some techniques for rhetoric, like rhetorical questions, a question that doesn't have an answer, allusion, hyperbole, repetition, and then I looked up ethos, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Good.
Ethos and logos. All right, so I've said a lot, and now I'm looking to you to give us an overview of rhetoric, maybe a little bit of the history of how it's evolved and where we are today. It's a lot to answer.
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's a very good question. And something that I'm always delighted to speak about, because having taught at several colleges and universities now, I realize that students really either have this or they don't. If they have this, it's because they were taught it along the way. In other words, that in line with the ancients, it's not really something that's just innate. I mean, in the ancient world, they knew if somebody had the ability and the talent, but it was a skill that had to be and could be learned.
Yeah.
And almost by anyone. So I would just preface this by saying that that keyword persuasive, we take with an eye of suspicion today in a way in which the ancients did not. In other words, that there probably was a greater willingness to be persuaded. And there was an appreciation for the ways in which one could be persuaded by a good speaker. And even those who were being persuaded by a speaker were aware of these three aspects that you mentioned, which are kind of foundational to rhetoric. There is the ethos, which broadly speaking is it's a character reference. It could be the character of the speaker or the character of someone whom the speaker is speaking about as being a person of integrity, honesty, kindness, and whatever other virtues we want to think of. And speech was directed towards that. In other words, by exposing, I like to use the word kind of like disclosing, meaning opening up the, particularly with the speaker, the reason why that speaker should be trusted. And so this is an appeal to ethos. With pathos, it's on the speaker's part to affect certain emotions in the listener, which again, we take, I'll use the same words, basically look at with an eye of suspicion, our emotions.
Yeah.
Whereas the emotional life for all the way through the Middle Ages and even into the Romantic period was something taken seriously. In other words, that we tend to be hyper rational today and think that we need to get over emotions, which is, I don't think, a very healthy way to look at emotions. There are reasons for emotions. Yeah. And speakers, rhetoricians knew this, and they knew that there was a way you could speak to appeal to the emotions and in a good way, not just a bad way, but also a good way. And then the final one, logos, is simply the reasoning faculty, the ability to present an argument that is tight as far as the premises and conclusions. So today, I think particularly in the wake of, let's say, the death of Charlie Kirk, there's a way in which there's been a lot of attention, I think, on logos. In other words, that two speakers stand against each other, trying to put together arguments. And these arguments, again, can be persuasive or non-persuasive, but they can also be logical or illogical, can violate the rules of logic. And that would be, so to speak, a violation of this logos or this reason. So those three aspects of rhetoric are very helpful to start to open the door to what rhetoric is. And I think that those who actually have the opportunity to study rhetoric, especially at the collegiate level, they generally start with those three and then add other kinds of aspects that are unpacked, especially by the ancients. And John, one other thing I'd like to add to this is only as the years go on, teaching the ancient world, teaching the classics, do I realize how absolutely primary speaking and the ability to speak was. In other words, today you could choose to be an engineer, a doctor, a technician, a teacher, math, whatever. You have opportunities available to you today. Whereas in the ancient world, you had to either fight really well, to be a great soldier, or you had to speak really well, and usually you had to do both.
Wow.
And Julius Caesar is a good example, someone who could do both. Cicero was not the greatest military figure or soldier, but he did serve. But those are the choices open to you. You wanted to serve a public life. You couldn't go into AI development or something like that. There was no such thing. You had to just be a great speaker. So it's important, I think, for us in the ancient world, when we look back on it and what we might be able to learn in our world today, to realize that speaking, the importance of speaking, we can't even begin to imagine its central importance until, now I'm not saying it's less important today. Of course, it's just as important. But again, it was the only thing in the ancient world, in a way that today we have so much else that young people can choose from as far as a career path.
Yeah, and I'm seeing, as we all know, because we're in 2025, so much communication is taking place via the written word on social media or in messaging. And
yes,
I don't know where these three things that we just talked about, ethos, pathos, I'm going to say pathos and logos. I think they're getting skewed. Yes. I feel that they are. Yeah. Okay. So you agree with that, especially in the show.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with that. And one reason I agree with that is that another aspect of you realize you hit the nail directly on the head, because the ways in which these aspects of rhetoric developed always presumed being in the physical presence of an audience, or let's say if you were an advocate, so an attorney in the ancient world, right? That you were in the very presence of both the judges and the defense. So that's still, to a large degree, the case, of course, in the legal world today. But again, even in letter writing, there's a very interesting insight we have from Cicero, who's not alone in expressing this way. When he wrote letters to his friends, thank God, to which we have a great number of because of his friend Atticus, he always pictured himself standing and speaking with his friend face to face. That was the primary mode of communication, whereas it's inverse now. When I think of like people that I speak with in a way that have dated, sometimes they'll tell me for a year or so this person, and then I found out they've never actually seen the person in person. They've been dating online. Or I have nothing against meeting people. I'm not anti-social media, but I'm saying is, I think you really hit it on the head by saying that we have a different world now, where primary modes of communication are really kind of reversed in a lot of ways. We still have face-to-face conversation, thank God. But again, if we were to compare it to the ancient world, when there was no Zoom, there was no FaceTime, there was no telephones. I mean, that was all that you had, and you had letter writing, which again was seen to be very inferior to face-to-face speaking. So inferior, in fact, that when the ancients wrote letters, they wrote them picturing themselves sitting at the same table as their friend or their interlocutor and writing that way.
That is such a great point. I'm wondering about the picturing of Cicero, who was a contemporary of Julius Caesar, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm picturing. I don't do the Facebook posts anymore of my opinions because I know it's like a black hole. It's a vortex of this. It's going to end up bad. It's going to end up with a lot of yelling while typing things to each other. I'm trying to think back when I did. I think, and it was during the 2016 election. That was when I think everybody got fired up because of the language being used. That's my opinion.
Right.
And when I posted at the time, I'm trying to think who was I talking to? I never even thought of who I was talking to.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it out there. And I think people, that is a missing link. Well, now today, 9 years later, what I see is people have raised the pathos part, the emotion.
Yes.
To the highest level up, and they are directly talking to people that don't agree with them, trying to convince them that they are right. Or actually more than that, it's not even trying to convince anymore. It's putting in kind of in their faces, like,
yes, it
just happened, or this is your fault, or your responsibility, and all that. And it's gotten to that level, and I don't know how that can be reversed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know how it can be reversed, and whatever feeble attempt I am attempting in these days by some of my writing and so on is a fleshing out of that aspect of logos or reason, because again, without diminishing the importance of the emotions in human life, even the ancients knew that we can think of Plato, the divisions of the soul, that the lower, so to speak, portions of the soul were guided by logos or reason. Okay. And logos was trying to keep that spirited part together with that desiring part of the soul. In other words, and he uses the image of a charioteer with two horses trying to control the two. And I think it's a very helpful image for today, because if there's any hope of kind of a return to, as you say, to just, kind of yelling at one another or just throwing things out there on Twitter, not thinking about consequences or who our audience is, whatever, it's actually having an interlocutor that says, okay, let's just do our best and let's use reason, because we know it's greater than you and it's greater than me. We have something to appeal to, and perhaps we might continue to disagree, but at least we've made an appeal to something that it transcends us, so to speak. And that's the importance of logos, I think, in rhetoric. Okay.
So ideally, we'd want to combine the three pillars, correct?
Yes.
But we need to be trained on how to do that.
That's right.
We're going kind of backwards because, well, the way I look at it is we've opened up the ability to communicate to so many more people than we used to have. I think there are a billion. I read somewhere when they looked, I was doing some research on social media accounts, there are 5 billion users of social media out of the 8 or 9 billion people on the planet now.
Yeah.
They estimate a number of accounts out there. Now, some people may have 10 accounts. One person could have 10 accounts.
Yeah.
But they're estimating like that many people can communicate at once. Can you imagine? Is it any wonder why we're having these issues? Can you?
Yeah, right. That's right.
Years, if these countries were like throwing stuff at each other, I mean, they'd be like.
That's right. Yeah.
One world war after another.
Yeah.
Who do you think is a good example of someone that in our lifetimes, I'll open it up, who was able to combine those three pillars effectively as a leader when speaking?
So a good example now, in fact, it's interesting you mentioned this. Somehow with my 8-year-old son, we got on the topic of, he's old enough now, and he was the one who opened up the topic of civil rights. So I sat down with him and we watched Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech from the Lincoln Memorial, and he was absolutely enthralled. Right, so there's, and he has no idea about ethos, pathos, and Holocaust, or what those things are, because you don't have to be consciously aware for those things to be working upon your soul, so to speak. And it was so interesting to see him respond to that, and it confirmed to me that if we were to choose one of the greatest, Dr. Martin Luther King, he knew how to do it, both kind of naturally, but again, too, no accident that he had studied these figures. He knew how to use. He was using them consciously, because it doesn't matter how good one is at speaking, these things don't come without some conscious refinement. Mm-hmm. So not to propose him as necessarily an example, but I'll just put our current president, Donald Trump. The reason I put him out there is I think people underestimate the extent to which he calculates what he says, because he seems to be a guy who shoots from the hip all the time. That's frustrating. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, as much as he's been criticized by that, what fascinates me is he hasn't made that much of an attempt to curb it. And the reason, and I think one of the reasons, is he's aware of it and he knows how to use it.
I agree 100%.
And I wrote an article, in fact, on this, where I think that, think what you will of him, but the whole point is that this is not accidental. And not just that, but it goes beyond that. It is conscious and deliberate, the times mm-hmm. when we would attribute it to anything from laziness to just making something up extemporaneously, whatever. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he's a person who comes to mind only because, again, I think he's used consciously. But Dr. Martin Luther King, I don't know who we've had since then, honestly, that I could sit down and just say that is absolutely masterful. What's interesting about Dr. King too is that when I read his speeches, I can hear him. And dare I say, if I never saw a video of him, I would put him in the same class as the ancients, where we can't hear their voice. But if I read a Cicero oration, I can hear the genius of it. I can do that with the written word of Martin Luther King's speeches as well. I can hear the genius of the rhetoric.
Letter from Birmingham jail is another one.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Just a piece of literature that, if you were to line it up against the best writing of the Greeks and Romans, for example, let alone everything that intervened, all that period, you'd say, okay, I see this characteristic. They would parallel. The ability, the greatest speakers we think of in the ancient world, that they would parallel. And the letter actually from jail is another example of brilliance.
Yeah, and getting back to Trump, and this is not about ideology, folks. We're talking about rhetoric.
Yeah.
So, I completely agree with you. And he even said it back during the 2016 election when he was campaigning, that he had the media. He was getting all this free media coverage. He didn't have to spend money. He delighted in it, and I don't blame him. He was using the system, and it goes way back. He on the show The Apprentice, he created an image, and going back before that, he had all these different images, and he was able to work the media and work.
Absolutely.
We can call it manipulation. It could be positive or negative manipulation. Either way, has the ability to manipulate opinion.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, for better or worse, that's exactly right. And it's a practiced or exercised type of persuasiveness in the speech. And he got it. I think that one other thing to say about him is, what's interesting is, not being a politician. It's like, I still find fascinating is that his rise in politics, in good part, was due to an application of rhetorical prowess that he had developed in the business world.
Yeah.
And that has happened in the past too. This is not the first time this has happened, but in recent American history, for example, it's not like we're without examples of that, but we really have not had anything to the extent to which, a real estate Mongol is basically able to kind of go in the politics by this real, again, a kind of like a very impressive application of the skills that would work in speaking, but not having had the typical rhetorical, let's say, development and education by being on the political track, since he was 20 or 21. So
if you had to give one piece of advice to people today who are having difficulties in communicating, and I'm one of them because I somehow got myself in a pickle with the left and the right, just in private WhatsApp chats. I said a couple triggered somebody from the left who doesn't want to talk to me anymore, and somebody from the right that doesn't want to talk to me anymore, who were both longtime friends.
I hear you.
Aside from just not participating at all, what would you say? I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is picture who you're talking to and maybe put yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll let you expand on that. For all of
that's a great
listening.
Yeah. Right. That's a great question, John. So two things I can think of, partially because in having taught rhetoric, things that I've found to be effective. The first is when it comes to, let me state this one first. I think for us personally, anybody personally who's interested in this, is to really just get away from the good examples of political rhetoric and look at other rhetoric. So I have a great example. When the Apollo 11 astronauts, they addressed combined chambers, I think, if I remember correctly, at the invitation of the president, after, they returned from their mission. Michael Collins' speech in particular, which is no more than I think a page and a half, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, Michael Collins was of the three of them on that mission, Buzz Aldrin and Armstrong. Collins was, the late Collins, just died, but less than 2 years ago. He was kind of the poet, and he was fantastic. And that speech, which is available online, there you have something that transcends political divides and so on. And that's just one example. There's so much out there. I think that one thing I recommend for people is to just not look for political examples of good speaking and good communication, but non-political ones. Incidentally, that can also just involve good writing of any style, so fiction. So that's one thing. The other is to think about debate. So rhetorical debate is to try to think of an example where it's not apolitical, but it's not, what do you want to say? Put it this way, it's stepping back from the big questions. I love the fact we talk about the big questions today. You got all these social influencers are talking about atheism and that's great. But I think a better example is to think of a community meeting on, let's say, whether to move the local waste treatment plant, let's say, from one part of the city to the other. It's not an, apodictic truth. In other words, this truth, does God exist or not? It's not that kind of a question. So it involves the kind of discussion and debate that is leading to a practical solution. And people who have strong feelings, they want to persuade, but they also want to rely on logos, because you have to come up with an answer. There's going to be some decision, right? Is it going to be moved here or here, let's say, right? Maybe it could be a third place, I don't know. But some decision has to be made. And I think it's interesting to look at the dynamics of a local community and how they go about discussing, whether it be online or in town hall meetings or whatever, how they come to those decisions. So that's another piece of advice I give to people, is use those if they're involved or not, especially if there's a direct involvement. Church council, Boy Scout council, I don't know, anything where you're doing deliberation and discussion to come to some practical, decision. Those are really good examples to start with, rather than the big questions of, I used a really big one with God's existence, but you can think of other ones that are, instantly hot button issues, gun control and so on, whatever they might be, things that instantly people just stick into a visceral response and go at it, right? So those are examples. Those are suggestions.
Great. I like we said earlier, people have gotten to a level of, I think they're in sort of like a fight or flight type mode. And the anger, the trigger point of going into that anger mode is becoming much easier to access.
Yes.
And that's I think a problem. So
Yes.
we'll, we could take a breath and pull it back. Some people brought up 9/11 and how it brought our country together. I hope it doesn't do something like that, but it distract everybody and put them on a different path together.
Yes.
That doesn't happen, but it shows you that it can be done.
Yes.
If I think we all made a conscious effort to do so.
Yes. Yeah, John, if I could just, because you read a great example with 9/11. We think about that. And I don't know. I mean, I was in Ann Arbor at the time. Were you in New York at the time of the attack?
Yes, I was on Long Island in an office building.
You were, okay. So you were, of course, right there, much closer to the tragedy than I was. But what I'm saying is, it's just so interesting how, when you compare of the cultural memory of that, and like you say, I think it did pull us together to a certain extent. But because the pace of history, fueled by social media and so on, and a 24-hour news cycle, right? Our collective memory is so much shorter than it used to be. So if we go back to the Civil War, I can think of even my grandparents. There were certain, they weren't alive then, but they could have had grandparents, great grandparents. That's how old I am. They could have been had some memories of it, but it's just that the way in which there was a slower pace of cultural change, that what brought a nation through tragedy back together happened slowly, and with a memory, I think, that was much more enduring than it does today. Because now, in a way, 2001 to me seems like ancient history. I mean, I've got students that, they have a vague idea of what happened in that. But I mean, it's hardly any different what happened in 2001 for some of them than it was in 1963 or something.
I think there's also psychology to, as I was thinking about 9/11 as you were talking, and how George Bush, he climbed to, he was in the middle of some rubble by the World Trade Centers that had fallen, and he had a bullhorn, and he was like, back at these people, and people were cheering, and his approval rating was up in the stratosphere. And then over the years, people slowly returned to not liking him. And I think but he was the same person. So I think there's something to us as humans. When we see somebody rise up, it's like there's got to be some, it's like we got to get him back down somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
Properly, but I feel like people seems like even it could be the Beatles. It's incredible. And then they're burning John Lennon's records because of one thing he said.
Yes, yeah.
It's always like something that people find something. It's almost like we can't fathom somebody being, or a group being that popular. We have to find something to drag it out.
I agree. Yeah. It's there's a certain animal spirit in us, right? When we kind of look for the downfall of stars, but I mean, which is probably an extreme example, but you're right that, that this is, I'll just dare say after you've said this, I think this is one of the reasons why institutions are important. I don't want to change necessarily the topic, but I'm just saying that when individuals, everything rides on an individual. Let's stick with the Beatles, as far as music. I mean, when in 1970, right, things fell apart. I mean, people, they just couldn't imagine that this could ever happen. But the Beatles themselves, they knew the day was going to come long before anybody else did. That it was not going to last forever. It's just, like you say, it's just human nature. And whether it be the confidence that we place in a political leader, right, who's extremely charismatic, and, this is always the human temptation. But I think it always leads to, at the least, great disappointment, and at worst, some kind of, socialist kind of trend. What I mean is in the sense of taking a single person's word in a dictatorial way as the only way forward. We just know that history has shown us it just ends up in disaster. So I think as far as on the societal level, that's the reason for institutions, whatever they might be. that transcend individuals are extremely important.
I was thinking, as you were speaking about other figures in history, and the big one, the biggest for me as a Christian and growing up Catholic, was Jesus Christ. And if we look at his trajectory up, right, he rode into Jerusalem and then taken down.
Right. Yes, that's right. Exactly.
He did the miracles. People were raised from the dead, and deaf were hearing, and blind. And then he had the mob yelling, like, down with Barabbas, right?
Yeah. That's what makes it all the more striking of the, the fleeing of the apostles, except for John and Mary. In other words, when we get to that part, his closest friends, that this could be anybody. This is the way in which, that Jesus as fully man is also just anybody, because even your friends will at some point, can betray or abandon, whatever it might be. And that's the most humiliating and unthinkable thing that can happen, I think, to any human being, is when the friends turn their backs and run away too. Yeah.
Yeah. And then getting back to the rhetoric part, is I did have a friend stop talking to me because I said something about Joe Biden and the Democrats recently, and how I feel they blew the election by having Biden was ill prepared for the first debate with Trump, and the whole thing with Kamala Harris running, getting into the game late, and all that other stuff, and then he just absolutely angry with me and said, "That's it. You're one of them," But let's turn to the subject of God, since we got into Jesus, and I mentioned in the introduction that you experienced working at the Vatican, which is like, how many people get to do and say that? And I'd like you to and by the way, let me back up a second. What I didn't say is, we talked about rhetoric and speaking and typing in little Facebook posts or whatever, Instagram or whatever. But we didn't talk about article writing, which Daniel does and I do on, and I know you do privately and with the college and all that, but also we're on a public site called medium.com, where you can see carefully thought out and written articles that talk about some of the topics we've been talking about. So head out there to medium.com, and I'll put links in the description of the podcast, because that's a whole other topic that I've interviewed Zuli Rain from medium.com. She's one of the people that runs the company there, and how they're working really hard to get quality writers, not AI, not clickbait, quality writers. Well, Daniel's a quality writer, everybody. So head out there and take a look. And all our articles, like I said to Zuli, I take a week to write an article. I draft, redraft. So, and I know you do too. You must, because they're so. But anyway, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And now let's talk about the big kahuna. Jesus.
Yeah.
What was it like to work? Well, first, you give us a little background on what you did at the Vatican, and
sure. So I am a dispensed Catholic priest, meaning that I requested to permission to leave my state of life in order to marry, which I do now, and have 4 kids and a 5th on the way, less than a month. But in my prior state of life, I was a priest, and somehow, you never know how this happens, but I got summoned to work on the secretarial staff, Benedict XVI at the time. The Vatican, broadly speaking, is just, it's kind of a same thing we say when we say, like, Washington says this, and others get, the District of Columbia. It's everything, so to speak, And the Vatican is everything, meaning it's the Pope and all the offices that help him, which is quite a few. It's the largest organization in the world, and so it's a big organization, and it's kind of composed of various departments and offices, and that's what's called the Vatican. And I worked particularly in the office of the Secretariat of State, which is that is the secretarial staff, the direct secretarial staff for the Pope. What I did there, it was a range of responsibilities that I found quite interesting. all of which revolve around linguistic work. What I mean is that the Pope has to communicate in just about every major language in the world, because there are Catholics in every part of the world that speaks whatever the language may be, even languages that are not a major world language. And so we do writing and translating. We also follow the rest of the world. So I would read English newspapers from the United States and Great Britain and summarize, what do we need to turn, when I say we, I mean the Pope and the Church and so on. What do we need to focus our attention on? What's the latest going on in Gaza, so on. So I did speech writing, translating, diplomatic work, because the Holy See, this is very interesting, a lot of people don't realize that the entity that's recognized as a territory, sovereign territory, is called Vatican City-State, which is the smallest sovereign territory in the world. Not strictly speaking a country, for complicated reasons in a jurisdictional way, but does have what's called observation status in the United Nations, European Union, and so on. So there's a delegate there, a non-voting delegate, that represents the Holy See, which is, the Holy See simply refers to the Pope and his office. When I say his office, meaning his responsibilities. And they all center, they're not merely religious in that he is a political head, to put it quite bluntly, because of an arrangement in 1929 between the Kingdom of Italy and the Church under Pius XI at the time, called the Lateran Treaty, and that recognized that it returned sovereignty to a much more limited geographical territory, to the Pope's authority. And that's what allows the Holy See to engage in diplomacy. So I was involved in diplomacy at that level, which is quite interesting. Basically just helping the Pope to do his work. It's a big job, and like any secretarial staff, be it in government or even corporations or non-corporation, the non-corporate world, it's kind of just trying to keep things both running smoothly, but also effectively, and delivering a message and so on. And it was a lot of fun. It was very tedious, very humbling kind of work, a lot of teamwork, but I loved it. And I loved it particularly, among other reasons, because my linguistic specialty was Latin, still is. And so it's the only place in the world that you can use that language actively, because it's still the official language of the Catholic Church as far as written documents. And I found that a lot of fun, to be working in Latin and writing in Latin.
Were you on site there also?
I did, yeah. I lived in Rome, so I crossed a sovereign border every day. Most of the people who work at Vatican City-State actually do. They don't live in Vatican City-State. There are people who do. But I lived in Rome and would cross, salute the Swiss Guard, and the Vatican police force was the next checkpoint, and went to my office every day. So, yeah, I was a student in Rome for 5 years as a seminarian, and then worked for 10 years at the Secretariat of State.
You were certainly blessed with an incredible opportunity. I wanted to mention also, I read one of your articles on medium.com recently, where you talked about the Pope's letters, how he, I think it was wrote to the families of the children that were killed at Mission Church.
Yes, in Minneapolis. Yes. He wrote. It was Pope Leo XIV who he wrote, and this is how it usually takes place. Yes, it was directly to console the families of the victims, and the community, and it goes via the Archbishop, who is a good friend of mine, Bernard Hebda. And it was a very touching, meaningful letter that the Archbishop read on site. But that's precisely the kind of work that I would do. We would help the Pope to respond in a timely way, because if you think of it, with all he has to do, how could he respond in 24 hours? As tragic as that was, right? There are tragedies all over the world. Right. So he has the secretarial staff with our ears open. And I'm trying to think of a specific example while I was in the office of a tragedy of that nature. There were plenty of them, I suppose. But we would be the ones to both hear it, make the Pope aware, get approval for a message, and then draft one on his behalf, and he would approve it. He would, put a lot of trust in us because he didn't have to read everything that closely at all. He would just trust us. But that's a lot of the work that I was involved in.
And just talking to now the broad subject of I almost like capitalism, of Catholicism. I was just to paint a picture for those who aren't familiar. It's my understanding. It's like something we take for granted. And I grew up Catholic, as I said, but, we were always at grassroots levels, like the local priest and maybe a deacon and a few nuns or whatever, and we never had line of sight to the Pope unless he came to America to visit. But just going back to the source of the Pope, and we talked a little bit about 1929 and how it became its own city, state, or country.
Yes.
Back way back now, Peter was the first bishop. The Apostle Peter was the first bishop. That's what we believe to be true, correct?
That is correct. That's correct. So we believe that the scriptures tell us that Peter assumed a special role as the rock, and his name was changed, in fact, from Simon to Petros to Rock or Peter. And it's a very winding history since then, how the Bishop of Rome continued to exercise in various ways what we call the primus inter pares, first among equals, but he has his authority as Pope precisely by being the local Bishop of Rome. And this is, as you mentioned, John, I think something that a lot of maybe non-Catholics don't realize, that it's a little more complicated than just a triangle with the Pope at the very top. Yeah. He does have an authority. He enjoys a certain authority according to Catholic belief that other bishops do not fully hold in, but for the most part, by far, the authority that he has is just as a bishop, as one of those bishops of the thousands throughout the whole world, the Catholic Church, the local leaders.
But we look to him as Catholics as being the almost like the president of the United States. He's our president.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's right. And it is an authority that's quite impressive because of that. In other words, it's not just power that he has in comparison, let's say, to other leaders, but internally and maybe externally too within the church, it's a spiritual power. In other words, it's for those who believe, there's a core conviction of how faith can change your life, and this is the leader, so to speak, at the top of that part of your life, which is the whole of your life. If you're a deeply believing Catholic, and but I will say too that I think that as someone who worked there, let's just focus on Catholics or those who recognize the Pope and his authority, because it's not just Roman Catholic, but others recognize his authority as well. But in any case, it can be exaggerated. In other words, I think that in some ways, in certain circles, much too much emphasis is placed upon what the Pope did or said this day or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's not very healthy. I mean, these are people who don't even know who their local bishop is and should know their local bishop much more readily than even who the Pope is. And so that's my personal opinion about the way in which I think there's an exaggerated kind of sometimes obsession, but at least a concern mm-hmm. with what the Pope says and does. And what ends up happening inevitably is people get ticked off and go, oh, he said that and that's it. And, meanwhile, the way I look at things is I'm part of a Catholic parish, and I've had I've been at odds with the Catholic Church myself for certain policies, or, the sex abuse scandals was horrific. I left the church twice because of that. And ultimately I decided to go back, and I said to, there's a nun at our parish that runs outreach program that basically gives food to the poor and clothing and all kinds of help. And I said to her, this is my church. And I just, looked around the room. I said, see the soup cans over there and the people that are packing those bags, that's my church. It's not there. But now there's also a danger. I didn't want to don't want it to appear that I'm putting my head in the sand. That part
bothers me if it's not spoken about.
Yes.
Errors in their ways along the many hundreds and hundreds of years, because we know that there were splits from the church, Martin Luther, and on it goes, because indulgences, people paying to have their given and all that. I'm laughing. It's actually comical when you think about it, that they were actually doing stuff like that.
It's true.
There has to be, I feel, a healthy perspective on like getting involved in and keeping an eye on things, but also it's like being a part of a corporation and they're doing something that's not right. Where do you?
Yeah, that's right.
Become a whistleblower, or do you totally ignore it, or do you go just whatever, it could be like they're polluting the water, and you say, well, I'm down here in the mailroom, I have nothing to do with that.
Right, yeah. Well, there's a good example, John, you brought up. Not just one, there's hundreds of examples, but those who are recognized, and I mean recognized, as saints in the church. So canonized, not just those who we would say, we all know saints who have never been canonized, holy people that did God's work and, in extraordinary ways. But those who are recognized by the church even were whistleblowers of a type. I think of Francis of Assisi, who, really... He had a great problem with irresponsible stewardship of the church's wealth, for example, right? And thought the best thing to do was just to literally strip off his clothes and become a beggar, and to think of the effects that he has. But he was a rebel. So, the saints, and he's just one example. Many saints, it takes years for them to recognize that, these in a sense were kind of like people who said the church needs to change. And they found extraordinary ways to change it. Mother Teresa of Calcutta would be another example, who's also canonized as a saint. I couldn't agree with you more that it all starts, whether it's the soup cans or just what we do in our families or our communities. And that's one of the reasons why an excessive attention to the papacy on the part of Catholics, it just distracts from, I think, what Jesus taught and showed us should be the simple way of loving and serving, and that should take precedent.
Another popular person for me is Meister Eckhart. Christian.
Oh yes,
he was. I think he was on the road to excommunication when he died.
Yes,
because he was saying things the Pope wasn't happy with.
That's right.
Weren't horrible things. I think he was speaking against duality. He was saying,
yes, that's right.
No. And it's like, no, you can't be spreading that, because and something, talking about the soup kitchen and how we act toward each other on this level, it goes back to the political front again. Just to touch on it. I was saying this to my wife yesterday. It's like, okay, everybody's upset because he's cutting food stamps. He's cutting that, or the government's cutting Doge or whatever. They're cutting food stamps. They're cutting this. They're cutting that. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Let's get out there. Let's get out. We right. The federal government doesn't have to do everything. We could step up and help our fellow humans. And just reading stuff and listening and getting all frustrated. Let's get out there and in a positive way, not in a negative way, or doing crazy stuff, violent stuff.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Local community involvement, even local political involvement. I now being a father with small children, I just realized how much more important local news is to me than it used to be, because I can follow what the school board is saying, decisions on where the playgrounds are going to be built, how they're going to be funded, just things like this, where that all happens there at that local level. And that's where it all starts, so to speak, as a federal, I think back to the kind of the concerns of Jefferson and Adams, but, Thomas Jefferson was one who, he was so concerned with the preservation of that local federal powers of those states and local communities. And, it's always a difficult balance between those two levels. And one of the most interesting and fascinating and important things about the history of this republic is that those questions aren't going to go away, how we share power, right? But it's just interesting from my viewpoint, again, of becoming a father relatively late in life, that I just realized how much revolves more actually revolves around what's going on at the local level than what's going on Capitol Hill in a lot of ways.
And what I do sometimes too is I use this example. I say I look at the news and I hear stuff and people getting nuts and like, oh, I shouldn't say nuts. I'm saying people getting all frantic and emotional.
Yeah,
Say,
right.
Open your door, look down the street, left and right, and see. Do you see anything going on? I mean, peaceful. Well, you know, they're going to come. Like, well, I don't know. Well, as of this time, peaceful to me. I live across the street from a golf course, and I see people. You know, well, not anymore. They're going to convert it. But I see trees and I see grass, and I don't see any immediate threat.
Yeah, that's right.
I saw the tank rolling down the block, or a half track, or whatever. You know, a Hummer or something with.
Oh yeah.
I'd be concerned now. You know that has been happening to a degree with ICE.
Yes.
You know, so, but in general, though, we're a big country.
Yeah.
We have communities, we have city, state, local, and so there's a lot of buffering in place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Shifting again and staying in the God category.
Sure.
Something you wrote about grace in one of your articles.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk about this quickly, and it's or maybe long. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
One article called "I Only Discovered Grace as a Former Priest," and the subtitle was, I think I got this right, but you don't have to be one yourself to discover it.
Yeah.
And you say, grace is nothing more than receiving something which you are entirely unworthy of. In fact, it is receiving a gift which you did everything to forfeit or even refuse. That's pretty heavy. I'm going to this, and I took another quote from the same article. It could have been right after I pasted this into my notes. But grace is transactional neither in religion nor in everyday life. The greatest gift is not the one you can give expecting nothing in return. Every time I try to do that on my own power, I fall short. Rather, the greatest gift is the one you receive out of nowhere from the person you least expect that you can never, ever return. I thought that was just an incredible series of, and I wanted to see if you could help us understand grace better, because I feel the reason why folks, they're asking like, why, John, why do you care about grace? Because I feel grace is all around us, and we don't see it, we don't feel it, because we're focused on the negative. So if you could.
Okay, yeah, John, very good point. And I'm glad that did resonate with you, and I hope it did with others, because it was a step for me to kind of share, to contextualize that. There's nothing about grace. I think it can really only ultimately come from personal testimony. And I waited to deliver mine until kind of the moment was right, both for me personally, and then I thought for the world, as you say, the world that we live in. And it boils down to a relationship with God is one, you know, we can even pull Meister Eckhart into this, because it was a great concern of his. You know, how do we stand? How can we stand in the face of something that is infinite and ungraspable? You know, completely infinite, all powerful, and so on. I mean, there's no proportionality.
Yeah.
You know, between you and me, there's a proportionality now. We're both human beings. We have human hearts. We share. You know, there's a way we communicate interpersonally differently than we would with our wives or whatever. But then with God, like, how do you communicate? Right? Yeah. Well, I think that what grace reminds us of is that, you know, no matter what we think we're doing for God or giving to God, and the scriptures, the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures are full of this. You know, God really can hardly just laugh at, like he needs anything. You know, God doesn't need anything. So we don't supply something that he needs. Mm-hmm. And on his part, you know, and I have to use the his. We could use the hers too, of course, because I'm coming out with an article now about another one, in fact, that I'm writing about the femininity, so to speak, that we have in scriptures about God. But let's just say God, God doesn't lose anything to share with us, right? So all of us, it takes a lot to give up something that's dear to us, to be generous in the way that God is, right? To be grace to somebody, to we're hungry, but we still share half our food with somebody, let's say, who's even more hungry. I mean, it just takes so much to do that. That's against our nature, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's not against God's nature at all. It's just absolute generosity, right? It's not forced generosity, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I think coming back to the point of grace is, in my life, I thought in leaving the priesthood, that I was doing everything I could to kind of like disappoint God, to, I could have walked away from the church. I never really thought of that, that much. But what I didn't realize, I suppose, is that when I was in a space where I was supposed to be, so to speak, with, getting married and having children, that grace was just like, now we're waiting for our fifth child. I think it's, each child is just another reaffirmation of this infinite soul that's in front of you. It's like, what did I do? Yeah. To merit this? I mean, it's still an imperfect analogy, but it's about as close as I've been able to get, because I just feel so unworthy of having a son or daughter. It's just, to be a parent, like, who's prepared? Who could possibly do that? So to bring it back, I mean, for me, because I can't help but tie this to my Catholicity and my faith, is that the point of grace, in other words, where I see it, that God, it's not an abstract way, but it is in Jesus Christ. So as the gift gave us that we didn't deserve, so to speak, and never could deserve. And it took a long time to describe that, but I think that to use the technical term, incarnational, there's flesh there. So now I can, relate to God in the way that you and I are relating right now, because he has taken flesh and is just like me, right, in all things but sin, as Scripture says. So I focus on that as this ultimate gift. But I think that for people who haven't experienced that, I think what the article you referred to, it's opening the door by saying, just think of things you received you didn't deserve, right? And from people who basically, they didn't have the means to actually make that gift, because I don't know about you, but the most memorable ones I received are from those who they really couldn't afford to spend that time with me, because it could be a gift of time too, or to share that, I don't know, that food with me or something like that. I mean, if it was from somebody who was, fabulously rich, that didn't make a dent at all in their household budget or whatever, to share that thing or whatever, it'd be different. But this is a person who had to suffer, to give up in order to give. And that's where I start with grace, is when we can think of those examples. Maybe people haven't had those examples. And as you say, it's sad, because I think you're right. The only way to just change our view completely and not get so angry about everything is to focus on being recipients rather than givers. And then we'll be better givers. But it's to first think about the things that, what did I receive? I didn't ask the sun to come up today or whatever, I mean, where'd that come from? Right. Think of the world and, the atmosphere of that. Why doesn't it, sometimes I take a walk and I just think, isn't this all just like on the verge of, implosion? A meteor is going to hit us sometime. I mean, just everything is kind of held in this intricate balance, and we can decide, are we going to try to, attribute that to something, whatever that might be, or are we just going to shrug our shoulders and say, I guess it's the way it is, that we just seem to be, I don't know, lucky. I don't know. I'm just kind of going on now, but the article you mentioned is one of the most dearest to my heart, because I really had to pour out my heart, because I had to talk about, I think, to communicate that, why I'm no longer a priest, which is, at least in Catholic circles, is pretty taboo, to be honest, sadly. And I respect the church. I don't want to, in any way, let's say, malign the church. I had a follow-up article about why one should become a priest, because I thought that was important to tell that story too. But the importance, again, is that I felt compelled to share my own experience of grace, because I thought there was a connecting point with others' lives, whether they're believers or not.
Much appreciated that you did that. And articles like that helped me, because when I've been saying lately, I have a gratitude attitude.
Yeah.
I missed out on so many things to be grateful for over the years. I mean, on the other side, of course, there's human suffering. And why is there human suffering? And
yes.
What I've come to terms with that by saying that humans are the cause of much of it. themselves because we have free will and we choose to fight wars where 100 million were killed, I think, in over time.
Yeah.
There was a choice. I mean, sometimes countries were led by madmen, too, who were mentally ill, whatever they were, Hitler and Mussolini and whatever. Stalin killed some 8 million or 10 million. So there were choices made. Today it's Putin that's invaded a country. And it goes on and on like that. Or the October 7th attacks of Israel and then the attacks back. It's all choices. And so God could just be observing and going,
It's right. Very good. Yeah.
Do you want me to make you guys drones where you just carry out everything?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
you got the free will and you're choosing to cut the cancer program. You're choosing. And on the other hand, too, there are some things I feel. I'm going to run this theory by you. Let me know what you think theologically, or just as a fellow human talking. There are diseases that develop, and it's very sad. We've all had people that have gotten cancer. My father passed away from cancer, and I say, why? Why doesn't God eradicate cancer? Just like I'm eliminating cancer, I'm eliminating this disease, that disease. I'm eliminating all diseases today, starting tomorrow. I feel that, and this may be naive, but he created, or the entity of God created life. And with every single form of life, even bacteria, parasites, and if he puts the on one aspect, then it creates this reverberation. Where does God stop? Does this make, like, I'm going to stop this form from advancing and that form from advancing and that form from advancing? But now there's an impact on the total design.
Yeah, that resonates very well. There's actually a word for this, interestingly, that's you actually entered into the most cutting edge aspect of theology you stumbled upon, but that's because you're thinking deeply and well. And that is what's called basically ecology or human ecology. We do have a word ecology. We all kind of more or less know what that means. But in theology, it's the interconnectedness of this all. And in a way that we can't even really, we just will not understand fully human life until we understand ourselves to be part of this whole, which is God's creation, which the crowning jewel of which at all levels, be they microbes or, the crowning jewel of which is the human being, the human person. But, as on the other side of the coin, human being just one example of this abundance of life, from plankton to microbes to all that we're part of this organic kind of whole here. And one way I would connect this, because you mentioned I have, thank God I've not lost my father-in-law is battling serious cancer right now. So he's our relative, who is my wife's father. And so so many people, of course yourself have had a direct experience of this. So many people have loved ones or themselves have fought cancer. It's just such an awful thing. But I remember my apostolate when I was in seminary was working basically in leukemia and other forms of cancer of children. So ages basically, 2 through 8, just spending time with their families and visiting there. And I just think of how awful cancer is. And then all the worse when, it's a new life. So, after months of birth, you find out your child, right, has cancer. But what I remember about that, and this is not going to be, now I'm referring to Pathos more than Logos, going back to those terms, but how do we look at that situation, right? Those situations. I mean, it's awful, they're evil, and we can question God, and it's right to do that, to struggle with God in a Jobian way, like Job in the Old Testament. But I remember one mother saying, someone else in the family was present in the room and brought it to that theological level, is how could a God do this? Yeah. And she said something like, speaking Italian, she said, I just cannot believe we're all here together. Like, that was the miracle for her. The attention was not on her child dying. And I would think it was the child's aunt. So her sister, who was, just saying, how could God do this? And the mother was totally refocused, so to speak. Yeah. And like, you know, it's not that we have to ignore in a facile way or be, you know, just obsequiously accepting evil in the world. That's not the point. It's that there's a global kind of look at this one. And she's just said, I can't believe we're together in this moment, you know? So people can take that for what it's worth, but that for me is kind of this more organic, whole kind of thinking on a theological level, which I think is very, very healthy.
Good. And of course, we're not advocating, you know, let's let things go naturally and not do vaccines or not.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is I'm targeting even myself, how I was angry when I prayed my butt off and lit candles and my father wasn't cured.
Yeah.
It was a horror, but it's my way of making sense of why these types of occurrences. And by the way, it was from asbestos inhalation that he got the cancer. So it was ultimately was a man-made issue.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The asbestos industry was covering, and there were lawsuits and all that. My mother didn't become a millionaire like the commercials say, but, you know, she did get some money from the companies that admitted that they covered up the existence of asbestos because they didn't want to cut into their profits.
Oh,
Again,
man.
it's man-made. And the same thing with PFAs. It's, you know, forever chemicals in the water and all that. There are choices made. And of course, it's going on in this administration now with the cuts and everything. There are conscious choices made by humans that
Right.
I was thinking about Elie Wiesel's book, Night, which is like such an incredible book. And he described they were in the concentration camp. Why isn't God helping us? And where is God? Someone said to him, the author. And he looked up at one of his friends being hung by the Germans. He said, God is up there on the gallows.
Yeah.
Statement.
Yeah, right. I mean, and again, as someone who's a Christian, you know, I would say that that's it. Looking at that, when I say literally looking at the cross and the suffering there of God, the God-man, that's my point of helping to open up a horizon for me to deal with suffering, humanly caused or not, you know. So that's the theological horizon, so to speak. But that's right. That for a Christian, it's we shouldn't try too hard to pretty up the crucifix or the corpus on the crucifix because it's bloody, and it's if we don't engage with the suffering of Jesus, then, you know, we will never come out on the other side, so to speak, with the resurrection on a theological level. Yeah.
Thank you. And one more topic about God.
Yeah.
We recently read interview with Woody Allen, the filmmaker, who's a persona non grata with some people now because of accusations, but he still, I feel, speaks very intelligently. He's almost like a modern day philosopher. I found the interview on YouTube. And also another person that I follow, Bart Ehrman, who's a New Testament scholar, who's dedicated his life to New Testament. Now, both of those guys are atheists. You know, Woody Allen is Jewish.
Yeah.
And he's an atheist. Both said similar things. One in an article I just read by Bart Ehrman on his blog. They believe that there is just nothingness after we die. It ends. That's it. There's no energy. There's no flow. There's no coming back. There's no nothing. And Woody Allen said, and I want to get your reaction to it, not because Woody Allen said, just the overall philosophical view of God. I'm not trying to answer Woody Allen at all. It's a thought that I think many of us have at times. He said, I'll use what he said, and because sometimes I think it too, and Bart Ehrman said it in different words. Life is generally tragic, and it ends, which is so sad. So sometimes we delude ourselves into thinking there's a God to make it easier for us to go through this journey that we were brought here, and like we're going through this journey, we know it's going to end, we're going to die. So it's like, make up this story that there's a God that's going to save us and that he's giving us grace and that and we're going to all be born again. You know, we're all going to be in heaven someday, like laughing and no more pain and all that. But what do you say to that fatalistic thinking? How? I get into it myself. I'm doubting Thomas, and I'm Peter the denier, all in one, wrapped up into one many times.
That's very good, and I'm a big fan of Woody Allen and Bert Ehrman as well. Because I think that there's a wisdom there, even though it reaches a very different conclusion than, let's say, a believing Christian like myself would reach. Mm-hmm. But it's so important that dialectical approach be engaged, because I think, not only for humanity's sake, but for our own understanding. Because it's true that I think it's only healthy if any of us who do believe just ask about that. What if this is all made up, right? To just deal with the pain that's there. One way, I think it could be addressed in several different. So I'm not privileging one way, but I'll privileging the particular way I'm going to mention now. But I'm going to mention it because it's one that I'm involved in my own teaching, and it is that there is a tradition, pre-Christian, several traditions. But we're going to take the one of, let's say, Plato, where, in Socrates, where there's a dialogical enterprise that's undertaken just to examine if there is such a thing as truth, but there's something that transcends the finiteness of this world, right? And that can open the door to another answer, right? to the question. In other words, rather than just nothingness kind of thing. Yeah. That if there are such thing as truth and beauty and goodness, these things which they seem to endure, they also don't seem to be things that we've made up. Mm-hmm. That just maybe we haven't made up the God thing too, maybe. Mm-hmm. So beauty is one particularly, because when I really experience something beautiful, there's a way in which when I engage with that artwork, let's say I love Cezanne, and there are particular pieces that I like. When I visit Paris, that I always return to. But what I experienced there is that there's something that it's gonna make it. It's gonna survive all the evil in the world, all the death and destruction, and so on. And I don't necessarily have to be a theist, but I at least open the door to think of, so where did that come from? That we're all paying money to come to see this piece of art that really is beautiful. It's not simply subjective. Oh, you think it's beautiful, I don't. There is artwork, we can argue about that. But there are some things in life, it doesn't have to be an artwork, but that we just say, I can't believe how beautiful that is. Mm-hmm. And that would be, I don't know how Woody, or would deal, with that. But if I were sitting down, talking with somebody about these things, that's one of the paths I take. There are other paths too, but I think that's one. Are there transcendental kind of experiences and values which might suggest that it can't just be these atoms floating in a void where they just come apart at death and there's nothing there? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Thank you
for that explanation. I was thinking, as you were talking about art, my wife and I went to a local park by a beach, and we saw a van with these funky murals on the side of the van, and there were a group of people that went around painting murals at the beach on the walkway as you go out to the beach. And I looked at these beautiful paintings they were doing. There were 3 of them, and it was absolute quiet, and they were painting turtles and shells, and it was on another crazy day in the news. I don't know what happened. There was some thing going on that was not good.
Yeah.
I went there. We just stood there looking at them, and it was like, this is God's grace and beauty and love.
Yeah.
All rolled into one. And so...
Yeah, and whoever paints those things too, you think of the side of the artist, So why take the time to some people, artists, they go into a certain trance where they don't eat for days, and so everything else is sidelined to complete this mural. It could be a public, graffiti mural or something like that, like you say. So why, there's just a why there that's so interesting. I think that's what I would do. I was talking with somebody, so maybe there's no answer to what the why is, but the fact that there is that very why somebody actually created this and why, you know, you and your wife are standing in front of it now, or I'm standing in front of this. The question itself is really, you know, can't be just glossed. That's the thing that just can't be dismissed too easily or glossed over. Yeah.
Good. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, I am with Daniel Gallagher, who is a professor at Royalston College, and we are on the John Passadino show. As you can see, my funky. Hey, look at that. You know, look at that poster behind me. I mean, that is art right there.
I love it.
Made it on Canva. You know, so with all my years of art training, I'm just kidding. I just made it on Canva myself. But this show is heard on Spotify, and this is to tell your family and friends about this, because we had such a fabulous conversation today about rhetoric, working at the Vatican and the Pope and God. I mean, come on, that's like three. Talk about the three pillars of rhetoric. Look, we just covered.
That's right.
Topics.
There you are.
And I hope if you like the show, you will tell everyone to head out to Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and of course, we're on YouTube on the video side of this. And please go check out Daniel's articles on Medium. I know he has free links. You have free links in many of the articles.
I do have some free ones, yep.
And that's pretty much it. This has been a John Passadino show. I really appreciate you joining, Daniel. Thank you so much.
John, it was a great pleasure. I look forward to listening to other guests because I've enjoyed all of them that you've had so far. Keep up the good work. It's I think you're creating a space that's kind of an alternate space for those of us who are looking for it. So I can't express enough appreciation for that.
Thanks. What I'm shooting for is just everyday conversation. I mean, again, back to grace and the great things around us. Is like there are people on our level. We're not famous people. We're not controversial people, but we have lots to say and
yeah,
to discuss.
Great.
This has been another great example of how people can open up and have a great conversation without it turning into. I'm trying to think of Jerry Springer, Maury Povich. I mean, those were the old days. The shows of the old.
Yeah, but I remember them.
Show. I mean, there were all these shows that built where we are today. Today it's TikTok. Today it's like somebody.
Right.
Airplane or like threatening or doing something wild to gain attention. So I like to I may not get the ratings. I may not get the 100,000 views. We were insulting each other and we started like tearing into each other. We're not going to get that amount of views, but hopefully there'll be a small group of people that enjoy this conversation. I'll be happy.
No, those small people live, I think, much happier lives in the end. So it's worth it. Whatever is traded off to get the happiness and to cool down is worth the trade today. It's worth the trade. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, Daniel. And this has been the John Passadino Show.
This has been the John Passadino Show.
Streaming on all platforms.
Spread the word.